I never thought I would find myself in this situation. But when my landlord threatened to throw us out of the house in 2 days, I knew I had to do something. What I did that night still haunts me to this day. In 2022, when I was still in secondary school, my life took a drastic turn. My dad left us, me, my mom, and my three siblings, without any warning or explanation. We lived in Lagos State, and up until that moment, life was manageable, even though we didn't have much. But after my dad walked out, everything changed. My mom was left to carry the weight of our family alone. Feeding four kids and keeping us in school became nearly impossible. My two younger siblings had to drop out of school because my mom couldn't afford to pay their fees anymore. I was 18 at the time, old enough to understand the weight of the situation, but too young to know how to fix it. My mom ran a small business, but the profits were barely enough to put food on the table, let alone cover rent or school fees. We were struggling, but we held on until one night when our landlord showed up at our door. It was late, around 9 p.m. My mom and I were sitting in the living room when we heard loud knocks on the door. My mom hesitated before opening it, but when she did, our landlord stood there with a dark expression on his face. He wasn't playing around this time. "Madam, your rent is overdue. I have been patient enough. If you don't pay in 2 days, you and your children will be out on the street," he said coldly. My mom's face fell. She begged him to give us more time, explaining how hard things had been since my dad left. But the landlord wasn't interested in hearing any excuses. He gave her a hard stare and repeated himself, "2 days. If you don't have the money by then, you are out." I sat there frozen. I knew my mom didn't have the money. Even the money from her business wouldn't be enough to cover half of the rent. I could see the stress and fear in her eyes. We had nowhere else to go. Our landlord, Mr. Ade, was known in the neighborhood for his shady lifestyle. He was a heavy womanizer, always bringing different women to the house late at night. He made a lot of money from the properties he owned, but instead of investing or doing something meaningful with it, he wasted it on women and alcohol. That night, after my mom went to bed, I sat awake in the dark. My mind was racing. How could I let my mom and siblings be thrown out of the street? What could I do to stop it? And then an idea crossed my mind. I hated myself for even considering it, but I felt like I had no choice. I knew Mr. Ade's weakness, women, and I knew that if I approached him the right way, maybe I could buy us more time. My heart was pounding as I slipped out of bed and put on a thin nightgown. I walked out into the compound where Mr. Ade usually sat at night, smoking and drinking. My legs were shaking, but I forced myself to keep walking. I spotted him sitting in a plastic chair, a bottle of beer in his hand. The dim light from the security bulb above cast shadows on his face. I took a deep breath and walked toward him. My nightgown clung to my body in the cold night air. I could feel his eye scanning me from head to toe. "Good evening, Mr. Ade," I said softly. He turned his head slowly and smiled. "What are you doing out here this late?" I sat down on the bench beside him. My heart was racing so fast, I thought it might burst. "I wanted to talk to you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He raised his eyebrow. "About what?" I leaned closer. "About the rent." His smile widened. He took a sip from his bottle and placed his hand on my knee. I stiffened but didn't pull away. You know, there are other ways to handle this, he said, his voice low and suggestive. I swallowed hard. I knew what he meant, and in that moment, I hated myself, but I was desperate. I will do whatever it takes, I whispered. Mr. Ade's hand slid higher up my thigh. My skin crawled, but I forced myself to stay calm. I was doing this for my family. If this was the price to keep a roof over our heads, then I was willing to pay it. You are a smart girl, he said, his eyes dark with hunger. Let's go inside. My legs trembled as I stood up and followed him toward his apartment. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. But just as we reached the door, something stopped me. A small voice in my head screamed at me to run, to get out of there. And then I remembered my mother's face, the desperation in her eyes. I knew I couldn't back out now. I woke up the next morning feeling numb. I avoided my mother's eyes as I handed her an envelope full of cash. Where did you get this? She asked, her eyes wide. I handled it, I said quietly. She didn't push, she just hugged me and cried. We paid the rent that day, and for a while, things seemed stable. But inside I was broken. Mr. Ade started calling me at odd hours, demanding more of me. I had opened a door that I couldn't seem to close, and every time I walked past his apartment, his eyes followed me, reminding me of what I had done. One night, I was sitting outside when a woman approached me. She was young, probably in her early 20s. She looked pale and thin. You need to get out, she whispered. What? I asked, confused. Mr. Ade, she said, he is dangerous. The last girl who got involved with him disappeared. My blood ran cold. I started digging and found out that several young women had gone missing after getting involved with Mr. Ade. My stomach twisted in knots. I realized that I had put myself in danger and I needed to find a way out. But Mr. Ade wasn't going to let me go that easily. In the end, I had to make another difficult decision, one that would expose Mr. Ade for who he truly was. What I discovered about him shocked the entire neighborhood, and when the truth finally came out, Mr. Ade's world came crashing down. But I learned that no matter how desperate things get, giving yourself away is never the answer. I paid a price for that lesson, but at least now my family is safe. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. Life can be hard, but sometimes the hardest decision lead to the most important lesson. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more real life stories. Thank you.